Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy is the topic tonight for a very special Wrestle Walk with Mike. Now, I know you're used to the Wrestle Rides, but we're going to do a little something different here, Wrestle Walk. And I'll start with a little anecdote. 2002, I was in Rhode Island, and I actually signed up for it's supposed to be a bus trip. It turned out to be like a van trip. It's supposed to be a luxury bus. Turned out to be a packed van full of Smart Mark wrestling fans going from Boston all the way to Philadelphia for one of the very early Ring of Honor shows. And they picked me up in Rhode Island, and although I was the biggest man size-wise on this fucking van, because I got picked up last, they had me sitting in the corner seat and very uncomfortable the whole time. But anyway, I remember being in this van full of Smart Marks, and it was like I could feel this above our heads and beneath the roof of this van, this think tank, this brain, this collective brain of Wrestle Geek that I was part of. And one of the like the 12, there was like 12 or 14 of us packed into this fucking thing. And one of the guys said pretty early on in the drive, for some reason they were discussing the Hardys. The Hardy Boys came up, Matt and Jeff Hardy. And somebody said, and I'll never forget this quote, this was 2002, mind you. The quote was, "Jeff Hardy likes the idea of being a professional wrestler, but Matt Hardy likes being a professional wrestler." Jeff Hardy likes the idea of being a professional wrestler, and Matt Hardy likes being a professional wrestler. And I thought that was a great little sound clip, and I sat there thinking, is there a fucking difference? But if you really know the history, how this thing has played out with these fucks, the Hardys, and their relationship with the fans and Lita, and all their ins and outs and outs and ins, yeah, it does. There's a difference. And look, you know, you can't really talk about Matt Hardy without giving some shout out to Jeff. I'll get that out of the way. Jeff has struggled. We wish him well. But he's kind of been one of these guys who maybe his in-ring style was just too Daredevil-esque, too many injuries, you know, collaborating with his addictive nature and so forth. But let's talk about Matt Hardy. And I think about 4 or 5 years ago, that's when in the old, you know, TNA or Impact Wrestling, while they were struggling to keep a fan base but still had a decent amount of fans, Matt Hardy and this whole broken Matt Hardy thing really caught on. And I'm not going to go into the replay and every little nuance, but when he went to, you know, he was really one of these guys that had an audience unto himself, you know, with YouTube and the videos and the fucking drones and his wife and, you know, brother Nero as Jeff Hardy, really had this cool thing going. Then you could say he made a mistake, a tactical error, you know, thinking that if he went back home to WWE and brought this to the largest audience, this fucking cliche, you know, let me bring my little indie cred to the largest possible audience. And I guess, you know, TNA didn't initially want him to use that gimmick, and he had to get it cleared and all this stuff. But eventually, once it was in the WWE, it didn't work. It really fell flat. And Matt, as I guess they call him Woken Matt Hardy, it just fell flat. They had one good little thing, I think, with Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt to close a Monday Night Raw. Kind of a predecessor to these movie matches. And of course on TNA, the Final Deletion, I believe, with brother Nero, was really the precursor to all this cinematic matches. The point is, people started paying attention to Matt Hardy again. People started thinking, man, maybe, you know, Matt was the peanut butter to Jeff's jelly this whole time. You know, maybe Matt is the real deal. And it goes back to that quote from that kid in the van. You know, Jeff Hardy likes the idea of being a professional wrestler. Matt Hardy likes being a professional wrestler. So now I want to say, let's flash forward a bit. Like I said, we're not going to go through every match analysis. Just my point is, I'm watching Matt Hardy now on AEW Wednesday nights, and I really do feel that Matt Hardy has been one of these guys that suffered the greatest because of the lack of an audience, the lack of a live audience. Of all the people, you can say Drew McIntyre in WWE as a champ, new champ, Braun Strowman, of all the guys who really needed that pop, that audience reaction, I think Matt Hardy, his comeback, his return to non-WWE warfare, in this case AEW, it's fallen flat, for me at least. And I think the biggest reason is he doesn't have that crowd reaction. Part of the whole Matt Hardy aura was the fact that the audience was there to respond. The audience was there to cheer. And the audience was just cheering this veteran guy who, if you think about it, didn't Matt Hardy job to Razor Ramon or on one of the early Raws? Was that him or was that his brother? But in any event, these guys have been around, whether it's in the backyards of North Carolina, and we know their whole story, raised by a single father, blah, 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 loving wrestling, their little trampoline league, and blah, blah, blah. But you see them on AEW now, and if you hear guys like Jake the Snake Roberts talk about, oh, you only need, 5 or 6 moves, snap clothesline, DDT, lift your fingers up. Jake the Snake talks about that. Kevin Nash talks about that. Cornette talks about that. Cena, the 5 moves of doom. I think Matt Hardy, he's kind of bringing that hokey poke WWE veteran style. Like, oh, I've got my 5 or 6 moves. I've got my twist of fate. I've got my, run in the corner, jump on somebody's back, give someone a fucking splash, whatever the fuck. And changing costumes in the middle of a match, it's a little bit too Mick Foley, Royal Rumble 98, okay? I just don't feel that Matt Hardy, I think he's another one of these wrestlers, and I'm thinking of guys like Chris Jericho, to be honest, and Foley, and a few others. Some of these veteran wrestlers who were part of the Attitude Era in WWF, once again, namely Jericho and Foley, in this case, Matt Hardy, and you can say Edge if you want. They kind of, these A- players in their own minds are A+ players. Does that follow? Does that compute? Like, Chris Jericho, look, Hall of Famer, unbelievable career, but he's like the guy who gets an A with a 94 compared to The Rock's 99 or 100, or Austin's 99 or 100. And Jericho is a 94. Back when I was a kid, 94 was the lowest possible A. And I know some of you in slower states with lower credentials could probably get an A with a 90. But in my school, you needed a 94. So Chris Jericho's like a 94, 95 A. Matt Hardy's like a 90. He's really like an 88 or an 89 who thinks he's a 94. Actually, he thinks he's a 99. You see what I'm saying? Some of these guys who've been around for fucking ever, they overestimate themselves, and it comes down to vulnerability. These wrestlers, what you have to understand, wrestling fans, is these wrestlers really are vulnerable because they know they're in a silly profession. They know they roll around in tights with other men for a living. And that if you really sat there and thought about it, it would just be absurd that anybody cares what they're doing. But we're wrestling fans, we're addicted, we've gone through this. So when I think of Matt Hardy, it's really a guy who, not taking away anything, he's a 94, but in his own mind, in his own Matt Hardy brain, he's pushing himself a little bit higher than he's worth. If good old JR, Jim Ross, would always say, if you could buy him for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth. So this Matt Hardy and AEW in sync, it's not working for me. It's a cliche to see him out there kind of doing his 4 or 5 moves and just being efficient and thinking, and of course he doesn't know that the audience is not there, that we're watching remotely from TV. If there was a live audience and they weren't giving him that full reaction that maybe he's expecting that we're giving him at home, maybe he'd change things up a little bit, tweak things. But I just feel that Matt Hardy is kind of coasting, resting on his laurels, and overestimating his worth. MikeMessier.com.